The living room felt too big all of a sudden. It was usually such a warm, comforting space, full of life. But on that day, it just felt cold, empty even. And in the very center of it, the same one where I raised my son David and said goodbye to my beloved husband Arthur, his voice sounded cold as a judgment. "Mother, with all due respect, this is now a matter for the heirs. It's family business." My own son, the boy I'd carried in my arms, the man I'd watched grow into adulthood, speaking to me as if I were a stranger. There was a formality in his tone that cut deeper than any harsh word could have. It was a rejection, silent but utterly crushing. In that moment, I realized I wasn't the mother, the wife, the matriarch of this home anymore. I was just an obstacle, a problem to be managed in their grand plan of inheritance. David sat across from me on the very sofa where Arthur and I used to spend our quiet evenings, sharing dreams and stories. His wife, Chloe, sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, a gesture of silent support that felt more like a calculated endorsement of his words. She looked at me, not with overt unkindness, but with a kind of calculated pity, a look that seemed to say, "We're doing you a favor, poor old dear." That was the real silent humiliation. They talked about the house, our home for nearly 50 years, as if it were just a number on a spreadsheet, a property to be liquidated. They spoke of selling it, along with the furniture, the quiet echoes of laughter, the faint scent of Arthur's pipe tobacco that still seemed to linger in the air for me. Every word they uttered was a shovelful of dirt, burying the history I had so carefully built, brick by brick, memory by memory. My Arthur, who had been gone only a few months, and whose presence still filled every corner of this house for me. My heart ached, a deep, hollow ache that stole my breath. The pain was so profound, it dried my tears before they could even fall. It was like I was watching my own life being dismantled, piece by piece, right in front of my eyes. And the worst part? It was my son, David, doing the dismantling. The boy I'd taught about respect, about family, about love. He looked at me with that controlled, almost detached expression, as if I were merely a business acquaintance. The emotional coldness was startling, a stark contrast to the warmth that had always been the foundation of our family. They continued their discussion, their voices a dull drone in my ears. Values, deadlines, practicalities. The distance between us wasn't just physical. It was a chasm, growing wider with every unfeeling word they uttered. They were so focused on the papers spread across the coffee table, the appraisals, the bank statements, so utterly sure of their right to what they saw as family business. But as they went on, their words blurring into an indistinct hum, something else started to echo in my mind. Not their voices, but Arthur's. A promise. A promise he had made to me weeks before he passed away. I remembered that quiet afternoon so clearly, just the two of us, sitting on the porch swing. He had handed me a sealed, plain brown envelope. His voice had been weak, but his eyes, those kind, knowing eyes, were clear as day. He'd given me a very clear warning, too, about when to open it. I hadn't quite understood the full weight of his words then, but they had stayed with me, a tiny, burning ember in the back of my mind. What David and Chloe didn't know, couldn't possibly know, was that the greater part of that inheritance they were so eagerly dividing already had a destination. And it wasn't in those neat piles of papers they were so diligently sorting through on my coffee table. No, it was somewhere else entirely, somewhere they hadn't even considered. And Arthur, my clever, thoughtful Arthur, had made sure of it. This cold calculation in my living room, this attempt to erase me from my own life, was exactly what he had prepared me for. I felt a faint stir of something I hadn't felt in days. Not anger, not despair. Something else. A quiet resolve. They thought they had me cornered, that I was a broken old woman ready to be pushed aside. But they were wrong. So terribly wrong. My name is Eleanor. I am 75 years old, and I was a teacher my whole life. This house, this very home in the Richmond Hills neighborhood of Richmond, Virginia, has been my sanctuary for almost 50 years. It was here, within these walls, that Arthur, my beloved husband, and I saw our dreams flourish. He was everything to me, my partner in every sense of the word. Arthur was always such a careful man, you know? He thought of everything, planned everything, down to the smallest detail. The house itself wasn't some grand, luxurious estate. Far from it. That every corner held a piece of our story. I could still hear the echoes of our son David's laughter bouncing off these walls when he was a little boy. I could almost smell my homemade apple pie on Sundays, a scent that always filled the air with warmth and comfort. And I remembered the quiet warmth of our conversations in the late afternoon, Arthur and I just talking about our day, our future, our lives. Our life, Arthur's and mine, was simple, but it was dignified. We didn't need much to be happy. Now, on my teacher's pension, my days are filled with the things I cherish. Tending to my rose bushes in the garden, their petals soft and delicate, just like the memories I hold dear. There are visits from my wonderful neighbors, who often bring a smile to my face. And of course, there are my long conversations with Arthur, even now. His photographs are scattered around the furniture, smiling at me from every frame. And I still talk to him, telling him about my day, about the quiet little things. I never asked much from life, just peace, comfort, and the love of my family. I always tried to teach David that too, the value of respect, of gratitude. For me, family was more than just a word. It was a sacred foundation, our greatest wealth, something no money could ever buy, and certainly something no one should ever be able to destroy. That is why what happened today felt so wrong, so against everything I believed in. But as I sat there, listening to them, a different memory kept pushing through the pain. A memory that felt like a quiet strength in the chaos. It was just before Arthur passed, you see. Weeks, maybe. He was already so weak. But his mind, it was as sharp as ever. We were sitting out on the porch, just like we always did on quiet afternoons. And he looked at me with those knowing eyes of his. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and handed me a sealed, plain brown envelope. His voice, it was barely a whisper, but his words were so clear, so profound. He said, "Eleanor, my love, I made sure you would never be helpless. This is your safe harbor." Then he looked me deep in the eyes and gave me a very clear warning. "Only open it," he said, his voice gaining a surprising firmness. "If one day you feel they are trying to erase you from our history." I took the envelope, my heart heavy with his words, not fully understanding what he meant then. How could I? I had no idea what was to come. I just held it tight. Later, I tucked it away, deep in his old filing cabinet in the study, a quiet place, out of sight. I did not open it. I did not even look at it again after that day. But the weight of those words, his voice, the look in his eyes, that stayed with me. It has stayed with me ever since. After Arthur passed, the house, once so full of his gentle presence, began to feel different. It wasn't just the quiet. It was a strange kind of silence that settled in, heavy and unexpected. The initial wave of grief, raw and overwhelming, had started to recede, leaving behind a hollow space where his laughter used to be. And then, slowly, subtly, I noticed other changes. My son, David, he used to call me every day just to chat. After Dad, the calls became shorter, more to the point. Less about how I was feeling, more about practical things, like appointments or bills. And his visits, the Sunday visits we always looked forward to, they started to feel different, too. Not like warm family gatherings anymore, more like an obligation, something he had to tick off his list. Chloe, David's wife, she was always polite, but I started to notice how her eyes would wander around the living room, lingering on the furniture, the antique clock, the paintings on the wall, a kind of appraising look, like she was sizing things up. It sent a little shiver down my spine, a feeling I couldn't quite place. Sometimes I'd walk into the kitchen and I'd hear them whispering, their voices hushed. As soon as I came in, they'd stop. A sudden, awkward silence would fall, and they'd both look up, almost startled, offering a quick, forced smile. It was unsettling, this little dance they did. I felt this distance growing between us, slowly but surely, like a weed pushing up through cracks in the sidewalk. It wasn't something I could point to exactly, but it was there, tangible. They'd promised to take me for a drive, or help me with groceries, or just come over for a cup of tea. But those promises, they were always postponed. There was always an excuse, always something more important. And then I started hearing phrases, little things at first. David would say, his voice a little strained, "Mother, you need to understand that things are going to change." Or Chloe would chime in with a too bright smile, "We need to organize life, Eleanor. Think about the future practically." The word practical, it always sounded so cold when May said it, devoid of any feeling, like a veiled threat almost, hidden behind a veneer of concern. The pain of Arthur's absence, that constant ache in my heart, it started to mingle with this new kind of pain, the pain of my son's indifference. It was a cold, sharp feeling, completely different from the warmth of grief. I felt increasingly alone inside my own house, like a ghost, just wandering through corridors that were once so full of life and laughter and love. Now they felt empty, echoing with only my own quiet footsteps. The silence, once comforting, had become a heavy blanket. And then one Tuesday afternoon, the phone rang. It was David. His voice, it had a formality I hadn't heard before. "Not from him, not from my son," he said, very clearly. "Mother, I need to arrange an important family meeting for this coming Saturday. We need to discuss Dad's assets." He didn't say Arth or your future. He said assets. My heart, it just froze in my chest, right there. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that something was terribly, terribly wrong. The quiet distance, the veiled words, appraising looks, it all clicked into place. Saturday was coming, and I knew it wouldn't be a happy family meeting. Not at all. Saturday arrived, just as I'd known it would, cloaked in a gray silence that matched my own state of mind. It felt heavy, pressing down on the house, on me. I watched the clock, each tick a slow, deliberate march towards the inevitable. When David and Chloe finally arrived, they didn't bring the usual Sunday cheer. They came with an air of business, a solemnity that was completely devoid of warmth. They sat on the sofa, facing me directly, almost like a panel, and without preamble, David spread a series of documents across the polished surface of the coffee table. There were so many papers, property appraisals, thick stacks of bank statements, spreadsheets filled with columns of numbers, figures, not memories, not a life, just figures. My home reduced to a collection of digits. My heart tightened in my chest, a cold knot forming. David began to speak, his voice flat, professional, completely devoid of the usual inflection I knew so well. He talked about the need to sell the house, quickly. He used phrases like facilitate the division of assets and streamline the estate. He spoke of it all with a coldness I never imagined seeing in my own son, the boy I'd nurtured, taught right from wrong. He didn't even look me in the eye. He just stared at the papers, occasionally gesturing with a detached hand. I tried to argue, my voice thin, almost a whisper against the weight of his words. "David," I began, my hand reaching out, a futile gesture. "This house, this is my life. It's the only place where I still feel Arthur's presence. Every room, it holds us." I looked from him to Chloe, pleading with my eyes, trying to convey the depth of my connection to these walls, to this existence. But my words seemed to float past them, unheard, unacknowledged. That's when Chloe, ever the subtle one, reached out and gently touched David's arm. A small, almost imperceptible squeeze. It was a cue, a silent signal, and he took a slow, deliberate breath. He finally lifted his gaze, not to mine, but somewhere just past my shoulder, as if he couldn't quite meet my eyes. And then he delivered the phrase that wasn't just words. It was a blow, a physical punch to my stomach that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. "Mother," he said, his voice softer now, almost placating, but that only made it worse. "Mother, you understand. This is now family business. For the heirs. You're not part of the distribution." The humiliation hit me then, a hot, searing wave. Right there, in my own living room, on the very sofa where I'd held him as a child, where Arthur and I had built our life. I, Eleanor, the woman who had poured every ounce of her being into this family, was being told I was an outsider, a non-entity. I was no longer a mother, a wife, a person with agency. I was a problem, an obstacle in their path to what they saw as theirs. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of that rejection. They continued to talk. Their voices, once so sharp and clear, now blurred into a dull hum in my ears. Numbers, logistics, deadlines. They spoke of finding me a smaller, more suitable place. A facility, perhaps. A place where I wouldn't be in the way. They droned on, oblivious to the fact that I no longer heard anything specific. The only sound echoing in my head was that of a heavy door closing, slamming shut in my face. The door to my own home, to my own family. The door to my future as I had always envisioned it. The silence that followed their monologue, when they finally ran out of things to say, was the confirmation. It resonated through the room, through my very soul. A cold, echoing emptiness. It confirmed, beyond any doubt, that I was completely, utterly alone. I, Eleanor, the mother, the wife, the woman who had dedicated her entire life to them, had been relegated to a problem to be solved. My existence, my history, my very being were simply inconvenient details. And I sat there, a ghost in my own home, watching my life being neatly packaged and discarded before my very eyes. The silence that followed their monologue was heavy, crushing, and I expected it to break me. I expected to crumble right there, tears streaming down my face, begging them to stop, to see me, to remember who I was. But something else happened. Something entirely unexpected. A strange, almost unnatural calm settled over me. It wasn't a peaceful calm. No, not like that. It was more like the quiet before a storm, or the stillness you find at the deepest part of the ocean. The pain was still immense, a raw, burning ache in my chest, but it no longer felt like despair. Instead, it was focused. Instead of crying or screaming, instead of reacting at all, I just nodded slowly. A tiny, almost imperceptible movement of my head. My eyes, though, they were fixed on my son's face. I looked at David, really looked at him, searching. I was trying to find the boy I raised, the one who would run to me with scraped knees, the one who'd bring me wildflowers, the one who'd hug me tight and say, "I love you, Mom." I searched for a flicker of that warmth, that connection, that love, but I didn't find him. In his place, there was a stranger, a man I barely recognized. His eyes were hard, fixed, and completely focused on the papers spread across the coffee table. He was a stranger, focused on money, on assets, on practicalities. And beside him, Chloe, his wife, sat with her hand still resting on his arm. Her eyes, usually so calculating, now seemed to reflect the same cold greed. There was no pity there, not really, just a shared determination to get what they believed was theirs. As they continued their low murmur, already discussing next steps, real estate agents and lawyers, my mind surprisingly drifted away from their cruel words. It flew to Arthur's old desk drawer in his study, to the sealed brown envelope that had rested there, untouched for so long. And his voice, so clear in my memory, resonated in my head, cutting through their insensitive drone. Eleanor, my love, only open it if one day you feel they are trying to erase you from our history. And then again, the warning. Only open it if one day you feel they are trying to erase you from our history. That day had arrived. It was here now, in my very own living room. They weren't just trying to erase me from our history. They were trying to erase me from my own life, to turn me into an inconvenient ghost. But Arthur, my clever, loving Arthur, had seen this coming. He had known, and he had prepared me. I didn't say a word. I just watched them, my silence an invisible shield. I memorized every gesture, every nuance, the way David would tap a pen against a document, the way Chloe would nod subtly in agreement, the brief complicit looks they exchanged when they thought I wasn't paying attention. I saw their certainty, their unwavering belief that they had won, that I was defeated. I let them finish their cruel plan, listening as they laid out every detail of my supposed future, a future without me in my home, a future they had decided for me. When they finally fell silent, expecting my resignation, expecting tears, perhaps even an outburst, I surprised myself. I simply stood up. The movement felt slow, deliberate, a quiet declaration. My legs felt steady beneath me, a surprising strength flowing through my body. And then I spoke. My voice was clear and firm, with a surprising strength I hadn't known I possessed. I need to think, I said. Just those 3 words. No more, no less. I didn't try to reason, to argue, to plead. There was no point. And they weren't listening to me, the mother. They were only seeing an obstacle. I turned and walked out of the living room, heading towards my bedroom. But I wasn't going there to cry. Not this time. There were no tears in me now, only a quiet, burning resolve. I walked past the photos on the hallway table, past the clock that Arthur had cherished. Every step was purposeful. I knew exactly where I was going. I went straight to Arthur's study, to his old filing cabinet. My hands, they were surprisingly steady as I reached for the drawer, for the sealed brown envelope. That piece of paper was more than just a document. It was Arthur's last, profound proof of his love for me. And now I realized it was my only weapon in this silent war they had so cruelly declared against me. It was time. The days that followed that cruel Saturday blurred into a landscape of growing pressure. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was real, tangible. David and Chloe began to act as if the house, my home, were no longer mine. It was as if they had already signed the papers, already moved me out, even though I was still here, walking these familiar rooms. Every interaction, every glance, was steeped in a strange kind of expectation, as if they were waiting for me to just disappear. One afternoon, I came home from the bakery, my little bag of fresh rolls in my hand, and unlocked the front door. The scent of yeast and warmth still clung to me, but as I stepped inside, the usual quiet embrace of my home was shattered. There, in the very center of my living room, stood a man I didn't know. He had a measuring tape in his hand, extending it across the floor. And beside him, Chloe, my daughter-in-law, stood with a too bright smile, gesturing around the room. She turned as I entered, her smile faltering only for a second, before hardening into something almost triumphant. "Oh, Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with a false sweetness that grated on my nerves. Then to the man she added, without a trace of remorse, "This is Eleanor, the former resident." The words hung in the air, cold and sharp. Former resident. In my own home. The humiliation was so profound, it made my knees weak. It wasn't a mistake. It was a declaration, a message delivered without a direct confrontation, but with chilling clarity. It was served in daily doses, this bitterness. A call from David, telling me not to bother planting new flowers in the garden this year, since we'll be selling soon. Chloe moving some of my smaller decorative items from the mantelpiece to declutter for photos. Each small act, a tiny shovelful of dirt on my living history. Each day, the feeling of being pushed further and further to the edges of my own life. The final, crushing blow came at the end of the week, Sunday, a day that used to be sacred, a day for family and togetherness. They arrived not with the usual casserole or a pie, not with the warmth of a family gathering, but with colorful brochures. My heart sank the moment I saw them. They were glossy, professionally printed, and far too bright for the somber mood of the house. They weren't for a vacation, or a new car, or anything joyful. They were for assisted living facilities. David sat across from me, his eyes flitting everywhere but to mine. He picked up one of the brochures, smoothing its cover with a practiced hand. "Look, Mother," he said, his voice strangely upbeat, almost cheerful. "We found an excellent place for you. It has 24-hour nursing, group activities. You'll love it." Chloe nodded vigorously beside him, a fixed smile on her face. They spoke of amenities, of scheduled outings, of a vibrant community. They spoke as if they were doing me a great favor, as if they were gifting me a dream, when all I heard was the sound of my life being carefully packaged away, made neat and convenient for them. They had already decided my fate. My heart tightened, a painful knot of dread and despair. I would be dispatched, sent away, so they could get their hands on the money from the house sale. My home, my memories, my very existence here, all reduced to a financial transaction. I felt cornered, like a wounded animal trapped in a snare. The sadness that washed over me was so immense, so heavy, it felt physical. A weight on my chest, pressing down, making it hard to draw a full breath. It felt like my lungs were collapsing under the sheer pressure of their indifference. My gaze drifted to the photos on the shelf above the fireplace. There was Arthur, his face smiling, his eyes crinkling at the corners, so full of life, of kindness, of love. In that moment, surrounded by the echoes of their cold, clinical plans, I felt an overwhelming loneliness. It was a raw, aching sensation. They weren't just trying to remove me from the house, I realized with a sudden, chilling clarity. They were trying to erase my existence, to turn me into an inconvenient memory, a faded photograph they could tuck away and forget. They were trying to silence my story, to rewrite it without me. But what they didn't imagine, couldn't possibly imagine, was that this Sunday's lunch, this carefully orchestrated presentation of my removal, would not end with my defeat. Oh no, not this time. But what they didn't imagine, couldn't possibly imagine, was that this Sunday's lunch, this carefully orchestrated presentation of my removal, would not end with my defeat. Oh no, not this time. They had arranged the dining room table with an almost clinical precision. The colorful brochures for assisted living facilities were laid out like a menu, each one open to a different, smiling, elderly face, a different, bright activity room. And right there, next to them, was a pre-approval form, full of a quiet impatience, a desire to get this over with. "We'll take care of the rest," she added, as if she were offering me a spa day, not a one-way ticket out of my own life. A strange stillness settled over me, a quiet resolve. For days, I had felt the weight of their words, their actions, crushing me. But now, seeing that form, seeing their complacent faces, something snapped into place. It was not anger that filled me, not exactly. It was something far deeper, a fierce, protective instinct. I knew what I had to do. In silence, I pushed my chair back from the table. The scrape of the legs against the hardwood floor sounded loud in the quiet room. Both David and Chloe looked up, their expressions a mix of slight annoyance and mild curiosity. They probably expected me to make an excuse, to ask for more time, to cry. But I didn't say a word. I simply turned and walked towards the study. Arthur's study, the place where I had hidden his last precious gift. My hands, I noticed, trembled a little as I reached for the old filing cabinet drawer. Just a tiny tremor, a last vestige of the fear and sadness that had haunted me. But inside, my determination was iron strong. I pulled out the familiar brown envelope, feeling the weight of it, the promise it held. It felt like holding a key, a secret weapon I never thought I'd have to use. Arthur, my Arthur, always so careful, so wise, he had known. He had prepared me for this very moment. When I returned to the dining room, David and Chloe were still sitting there, waiting. Their expressions were now openly confused. They watched me, their heads tilted slightly, as if trying to decipher my actions. I walked slowly, deliberately, back to the table. I held the envelope up, just for a moment, letting them see it. Then, under their confused, widening gaze, I tore the seal. The sound was sharp, decisive, a tiny rip that felt like a crack in their carefully constructed plans. From within the envelope, I took out 2 documents. Not bank statements, not appraisals, but something far more personal, far more powerful. The first was a cream-colored paper, official-looking, with a formal seal. Arthur's official will. The second, a thick, substantial paper, was the house deed, the deed to this very house, my home. I placed both papers, with deliberate slowness, right on top of their cheerful assisted living brochures. They lay there, stark and undeniable, against the brightly colored pages. I took a deep breath. My voice, when it came, was clear, clear and firm, without a tremor, without a hint of the broken woman they expected. This house, I began, my gaze sweeping over the room, the familiar walls, the furniture that held so many memories. Then I looked at David, then at Chloe, fixing them with a steady gaze. This house was never part of your inheritance. I saw David flinch, just slightly. Arthur, I continued, put it in my name 10 years ago. It is mine, legally and morally mine. I watched as the color drained from David's face. It was as if all the blood had suddenly rushed from his head. He looked down at the house deed, his eyes wide, incredulous. He picked it up, his fingers fumbling slightly, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. Chloe beside him, her mouth had fallen open, agape, staring from the paper in David's hand to me, then back to the paper. The practiced smile was gone, replaced by a look of sheer shock. And the will? I continued, my voice gaining strength, not raising, but cutting through the silence like a sharp knife. It makes it very clear that all other assets and investments remain under my exclusive administration. I paused, letting the words sink in, watching their faces. He left nothing to be divided now, nothing for you to touch. David's face, already pale, flushed an angry red. His jaw tightened. He slammed the deed down on the table, a sudden, violent sound that made us all jump. "This is sabotage," he roared, his voice cracking with rage. "Dad wouldn't do this. He would never." I met his furious gaze, looking deep into his eyes, and I saw the boy I knew, the one I had loved, buried beneath layers of greed and calculation. For a moment, just a flicker, I saw him. My voice softened, but it held an unwavering resolve. "No, my son," I replied, my eyes holding his. "This is called dignity." He secured mine. He foresaw that one day you might try to take it. The words hung in the air, a final, unarguable truth. The silence that followed was absolute, filled only with the echoes of my own voice and the weight of their stunned realization. They sat there, defeated, their grand plans shattered around them, right there on my dining room table, next to the glossy brochures of my supposed future. But that future, I now knew, was not theirs to decide. The game, I realized, had just begun, and I, Eleanor, was holding all the cards. The silence that settled in the dining room after my words was absolute. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence I had grown used to. This was different. It vibrated with their shock, with the shattered pieces of their plans. David and Chloe just sat there, frozen, their faces pale, their mouths still slightly agape. They looked like statues, suddenly exposed, under a harsh light. They didn't say another word, not a single sound. After a long, strained moment, David slowly, almost robotically, pushed his chair back. Chloe followed suit, her movements stiff. They got up, and without a glance back, without a syllable of goodbye, they simply walked out of my dining room, out of my house. They left behind the colorful brochures for the assisted living facility, lying there on the table, right on top of my house deed, like a discarded promise or a bad dream. The next morning, the first thing I did was call a locksmith, a wonderful young man, quiet and efficient, came and changed all the locks on every door and window. The old keys, the ones David and Chloe still had, were now useless. The sound of the new key turning smoothly in the front door, clicking into place with a solid thud, was like music to my ears. It wasn't just the sound of metal moving. It was the sound of my freedom regained. It was the sound of my home, finally truly mine again. The house. For months, it had felt oppressive, a place where I was merely waiting to be evicted. It had felt heavy, filled with their unspoken judgments and their greedy looks. But now, it was different. The air felt lighter, cleaner, as if a thick, dusty blanket had been lifted from every room. I walked through the living room, touching the back of the sofa, running my hand over the old wooden frame of the armchair. A feeling of serene peace began to settle in my chest, a quiet warmth spreading through me. It was a hard-won peace, earned through pain, but so very precious. I returned to caring for my rose bushes in the garden with new vigor. Each morning, I would go out, feeling the sun on my face, the soft earth between my fingers. I trimmed the wilting petals, coaxed new growth from stubborn branches. It was a quiet ritual, a reminder of patience and resilience. I even repainted the living room wall, the one Chloe had criticized, saying the cream color was outdated. I chose the same cream, a subtle act of defiance, a reclaiming of my own taste. And I moved Arthur's old armchair, his favorite, exactly back to where he liked it, by the window, where the afternoon sun would warm the upholstery. It felt right. It felt like coming home again, truly. My days are now filled with small joys, simple, everyday pleasures that had been overshadowed by the dark cloud of their actions. I have coffee with my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, on her porch, gossiping about the neighborhood cats and sharing recipes. I started writing letters again, proper, longhand letters, to my distant cousin in Oregon, telling her about my rose bushes and the quiet life here. I dust off Arthur's old radio and let classical music play softly in the background as I read or knit. There's no rush, no pressure, just the gentle rhythm of my own choosing. I don't know if I will ever fully forgive my son. The wound he inflicted runs deep, a betrayal from the person I loved most in this world after Arthur. But I have learned to live without his presence. The silence, once so painful, is now a companion, a quiet space where I can simply be. I no longer wait for his calls or dread his visits. That expectation, that hope is gone, and with it, a different kind of burden has lifted. A few days ago, I did something small, but it felt big. I ordered a little plaque, a simple, elegant one, and fixed it to the gate at the front of the house. It reads in clear, graceful letters, Eleanor Vance, my name, my home, my story. It's a declaration, a quiet, firm statement to the world and to myself. I discovered that the future, my future, still belonged to me. It wasn't gone. It was just waiting for me to pick it up and shape it, exactly as I wanted. Putting up that little plaque, Eleanor Vance, on my gate, it felt like a quiet declaration, not just to the world, but to myself. It made me think about everything that had happened, about how quickly a life, a family, can change. You know, you spend your whole life building something. You pour your heart into it, believing in its strength, in the people you love. You teach them lessons, you offer guidance, you make sacrifices you never even count. And then, one day, you wake up and find that the very foundation you trusted has shifted beneath your feet. I learned something profound from all of this, from the pain and the injustice. I learned that dignity isn't something someone else gives you, like a gift, or something they can take away, like a possession. It's something you hold on to, deep inside, even when they try with all their might to strip it away. It's that quiet strength that whispers, I am still here. I still matter. My life has meaning, and my history is real. And for people like me, for older folks, that lesson feels especially important. It sometimes feels like society, or even our own families, see us as just old, a burden perhaps, or simply a shadow of who we once were. Our stories, our experiences, our hard-won wisdom, they get brushed aside, as if our lives ended the moment we stopped being productive in a certain way. Our value, it seems, is sometimes measured only in financial terms, in what we own, rather than in who we are, or what we've given throughout our lives. The pain of that betrayal, of being treated like an obstacle by my own son and his wife, it was deep, deeper than I can easily put into words. It wasn't just about the house or the money they wanted. It was about respect. It was about being seen as a whole person, with a history, with feelings, with a right to my own place in the world. They tried to erase me, you see, to turn me into an inconvenient memory, a faded photograph they could tuck away and forget. They were trying to silence my story, to rewrite it without me. But Arthur, my dear, clever Arthur, he made sure I wasn't forgotten. He knew. He gave me the tools to fight for my own dignity, for my own place. He gave me a way to protect the life we built, a life that was still very much mine. And you? Have you ever felt invisible or treated like a burden by precisely those who should see and protect you most? Has your history ever been threatened by the greed or indifference of those you loved most? It's a strange thing, this journey. You think you know yourself. You think you know your family. And then life throws you a curveball that changes everything. But through that pain, that deep, unsettling experience, I found a new kind of strength within myself. A resilience I didn't know I had. I found my own voice again. A voice that was almost lost in the overwhelming, quiet rhythm of my days continues. The roses bloom, the sun warms my living room, and the classical music plays softly on the radio. Life goes on. But it goes on differently now, more consciously, more truly mine. And I'm still here, still Eleanor, still learning, still living, still remembering. This voice, it's not loud. It doesn't need to be. It's quiet, firm, and it comes from a place deep inside me, a place that Arthur helped me find. After they left, after David and Chloe walked out of my life, leaving behind those brochures like a discarded lie, the house finally breathed. I breathed. It wasn't just the new locks, though that certainly helped. It was a feeling of lightness, as if a great weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had been lifted. The first few days were strange. A quiet that wasn't lonely anymore, but peaceful. I walked through the rooms, the ones they had planned to sell, the ones they had looked at with such calculating eyes, and I saw them anew, not as mere assets, but as spaces filled with echoes of laughter, shared meals, quiet evenings. They were mine. Every scuff on the floorboards, every sunbeam that danced across the dust motes in the afternoon light, every memory clinging to the old wallpaper. They were all mine. A deep sense of belonging washed over me, a feeling I hadn't realized I'd lost until I found it again. I spent a lot of time in the garden with my roses. Their petals, so delicate, yet their thorns so resilient. Like life, I thought. You have to nurture them, protect them, and sometimes you have to cut away what isn't serving them anymore so they can bloom even stronger. There was a morning, just a few days ago, when the sun was particularly warm on my face. I was pruning the climbing roses by the porch, and I looked up at the vast blue sky. It was so open, so endless, and I felt a connection, not just to the earth beneath my feet, but to something larger, something serene. It was like the sky was reminding me that even after all the storms, there's always a clear, bright expanse waiting. My simple routines, the ones I mentioned before, they've become anchors, comforting rituals. My morning coffee on the porch, watching the birds, listening to the gentle hum of the neighborhood waking up. The letters to my cousin, now filled with not just the mundane, but with a newfound sense of quiet joy and discovery. The classical music on Arthur's old radio, filling the house with beautiful melodies that speak to the soul, not to the mind that calculates profits and losses. It's a richness that has nothing to do with money. It's a richness of spirit. I'm not saying it's easy every day. There are moments, of course, when a memory of David as a small boy flickers, and a pang of sadness goes through me. The hope of a different relationship, one that recognized love and respect above all else, still lingers like a phantom limb. But it doesn't consume me anymore. I understand now that some wounds, no matter how deep, can heal. And sometimes healing means accepting that not everyone will see your worth. Not everyone will value your history. And that's okay. Because I see it, I value it. And Arthur, my clever, thoughtful Arthur, he saw it too. He didn't just give me the house, you know? He gave me a way to stand firm, to reclaim my space. He gave me the profound gift of knowing that I was truly loved, truly protected. It wasn't about ownership of property. It was about ownership of my life, my dignity. And that is the most precious inheritance of all. It's a gift that resonates not just for me, but for anyone who has ever felt overlooked, undervalued, or just plain invisible. And if you want to keep receiving real stories like this, pay attention. YouTube might be unsubscribing you without warning. Confirm you're still subscribed to the channel and activate the bell. Because these stories, they're more than just entertainment. They're reflections. They're reminders that we all have a voice, and our experiences, no matter how quiet or how loud, deserve to be heard. And knowing that you're still here, still listening, still connected, it means the world to me. It really does. It's a reminder that even when things seem bleak, there's always a connection waiting to be found, a shared understanding that truly brightens the path ahead.